Thank you all for being with us today. I'm Colleen Condon, one of the board members with Washington Child Care Centers Association. We will have a few other board members on with us as we get going. Our lobbyist, Amy Anderson, is here with us today. And most importantly, we are joined by Tim O'Connell, who has been retained with WCCA to host this presentation today and get some information out to our members. So without a delay, I will pass it over to Tim.
Well, good afternoon. I would say, well, at least it's a pleasure for me to be here. I fully expect that the subject that we're here to talk about is not a pleasure for all of you, but that's my life. I have been a labor and employment lawyer in the state of Washington for 40 years, and I have learned not to take it personally when my clients tell me that they don't want to have to talk to me. That's the nature of what I do. But I am here today to talk to you because your board has shared with me some concerns about potential union organizing activity. All right, are you seeing my screen? Perfect. The union is knocking at the door. They are out there. They are knocking on doors as we speak. And what are we going to do about that? So here's what I hope to cover. And I'm going to go at a fairly high level on some of this material for some reasons we'll talk about. But a union organizing campaign, there's a certain rhythm to it. They all, frankly, end up having much the same kind of structure to them. So we'll talk about that, what to be on the lookout for. If you are under the impression that there is a union nosing around at your center, there's some do's and don'ts. Because one of the things that we have to remember about these campaigns is that labor law is regulated by federal law. They have been proceeding for 80, almost 90 years now, adjudicating these cases on a case-by-case basis. And so sometimes the rules about what is permissible and what is not can be pretty picky. So if it sometimes sounds like something is unlawful and a very nearly identical thing is lawful, that's the way the board has looked at these issues. And hopefully I'll leave enough time for some questions. Okay, so what do we know so far? We know the union is soliciting employees in this workspace in your centers. The union obtained the contact information for that from the state. Unfortunately, or fortunately, your attitude on this sometimes depends on the specific situation that's at issue. Under Washington's Public Disclosure Act, state agencies are required to turn over information to requestors unless there's a specific exemption for it. And interestingly, while the State Public Disclosure Act has an exemption for information about children in child care centers, it doesn't have an exemption about information pertaining to employees of child care centers. So unless there is an exemption in some of the state statutes that regulate child care centers, and I haven't had the opportunity to look at that, the fact that the state turned it over is probably not something that we're going to get very far complaining about. There is a prohibition on using information obtained through a Public Disclosure Act request for commercial purposes. But again, Washington being the state that it is, labor unions are viewed favorably by the folks down in Olympia. And I think we'll have a very difficult time convincing them that their organizing activities are commercial purposes. So my understanding from members of your board is that, in fact, we have had some instances where the union is going out and contacting people at their homes. And we'll talk about that because it leads to me at least to the next question, which is, what do you do about it? Because there is a word for employers that pay no attention to potential union activity in their workforce, and that word is unionized. So if that's not where you want to end up, we'll talk about what to do about it. So I want to talk about a typical union organizing campaign. And by that, I mean, I have been doing this for 40 years. And as I think I said at the beginning, a lot of these campaigns have a lot of similarities all the time. Let's be real with one another. Far more often than not, a union is nosing around your workforce because some of your employees have contacted the union. They will tell you every time that most of their leads are generated by disgruntled employees who are unhappy about something in their workplace and want to do something about it. The kind of thing that you're going through right now, where the union is targeting a group of employees, is a little less common. But they do it when they are, for whatever reason, interested in going after a particular group of employees. And when they do that, you know, they have a number of avenues to in-person contacts. We have to just understand, I mean, just deal with the fact that it's lawful. It is completely lawful for the union to send its organizers knocking on doors. And part of the reason for that is that this is all governed by federal law, the National Labor Relations Act. And that's because, my understanding, most of the centers here are private sector entities. There's different rules that are applicable to public employers. But if you're a private sector entity, you're governed by the NLRA, and the NLRA protects, this is a magic phrase, protected concerted activity. We all know what activity is. Concerted means it's employees working together. And protected means that most things that employees do in which they are working together are covered. There are some exceptions to that. There are some things that it is not lawful for them to do. That's pretty few and far between. And in this context of organizing activity, most of what the unions and their proponents, and that means your employees who are actively supporting the union, most of what they're going to be doing is protected activity. And so as a consequence, when they knock on the front door of your employee's house and ask to talk with them about the union, they're engaging in lawful conduct. We see more social media these days. Lots of times, if you go out and you start inputting in your Google a search request for employees of XYZ Co., you don't have to go very far down the results when you'll start getting union activity if you are a target. Rare, but it does happen, is public advertising. They can do that. They can target you in public advertising saying, you know, employees of ABC Child Care Center, call us if you're not happy. They're allowed to do that. Once the union gets a foothold in your workforce, in the sense that they have identified one or more employees who, for reasons of his or her own, is interested in unionizing, one of the things they will do is form an internal organizing committee. Now, they'll get assistance from their union. Most unions, and SEIU is high on this list, employ people whose official title is organizer. That's what that person does. His or her own whole job is out there attracting employees to join the union. In a very real sense, your employees are their stock in trade. They're seeking to get more than one, depending upon the size of the workforce, more than two. They want to get a few employees together to form an internal organizing committee and they do this all in secret. It is one of the things that we just have to accept. They work in the shadows in the early stages of these campaigns. And they do that on purpose because they intentionally try and instill fear in the organizing committee. They will tell the organizing committee members that if the employer finds out too soon, all they're going to do is just fire you. Boom. So they try and make sure that the internal organizing committee stays under the radar. They explicitly are directed to target coworkers. It is routine for them to do it at home. It is routine for them to do it at work. They might, at some point in the process, it's not all that unusual for them to drop the secrecy and go public. Now, why would they do that? Well, they think they get some protections because if you know that your employees are organizing, and it just so happens that someone who the union has told you is on your organizing committee gets fired for some good reason, they will run, not walk, to the nearest office of the National Labor Relations Board. That's the entity that enforces the NLRA. Their offices are just down here on 2nd Avenue, downtown Seattle. It sets you up, and let there be no doubt about it, you are being set up for retaliation and interference claims. The whole job of the internal organizing committee is to get enough support from coworkers so that they can make a demand to bargain. And once they demand to bargain, once you get a letter or an email from someone claiming to be from SEIU or from any other union for that matter, here's the single best piece of advice I can give you right away. Get experienced labor law counsel on board. Now, I use the term labor law counsel on purpose. I describe myself as a labor and employment lawyer. I'm a labor lawyer. I also do employment law. There are literally hundreds of members of the Washington State Bar who are employment lawyers, and most of them are crackerjack folks. But I say, I really do mean that. I don't mean to disparage any of my colleagues who don't regularly practice labor law. And by labor law, I mean the law pertaining to union management relations. The rules are very picky and they're very precise. And they have some, in this context, extraordinarily quick deadlines. So if you're talking to someone who's a really good employment lawyer, but doesn't know labor law, you know, you need to get some specialized help with this kind of thing, because this is an area where when we start talking about communicating with your employees, literally two words which sound like they mean the same thing can have drastically different consequences for you as an employer. If you have gotten a demand for bargain, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Let's go back. The CEMEX case, that's a relatively recent decision out of the National Labor Relations Board that was issued when the board was controlled by appointees from President Biden. CEMEX kind of flipped the law on its head. Used to be that if your employees came to you, or a union representative of your employees came to you and said, we want to unionize and we demand that you recognize us to bargain collectively, you would say, nope, no thanks. And the union would have to go to the NLRB and seek a secret ballot election. No more, says the Biden NLRB. If the union comes to you and says that we represent a majority of your employees and we want you to recognize us for purposes of collective bargaining, it is the employer's obligation to go in and demand that the NLRB conduct an election. And remember when I said there are really tight timeframes on this? You got to do so within 14 days. If you don't seek an election from the board within 14 days of them sending you a demand to bargain, you will be deemed to have accepted their representation that they represent a majority of folks, and you will have a bargaining obligation with the union. So when you get that demand, talk to somebody who knows what he or she is talking about, because the rules are really pretty stringent. And even if you do go in and petition for an election, under some rules that the board adopted actually during the Obama era, we have what are referred to as the quickie election rules. They're called that because it's shockingly fast. If you have a dispute over how the union has defined the bargaining unit, or there's some other reason that you think they shouldn't be allowed to have an election, you're going to have a hearing in 7 to 10 days. That is not a lot of time. That is not a lot of time to gather all your evidence, much less get ready for a hearing. And once the regional director hears that set of complaints, you're going to have an election in weeks, not months. Never ceases to amaze me. It takes us about 2 years to elect a president, but it's going to take us less than 2 months to elect a union, even though a president's only around for 4 years and many union bargaining relationships last for decades. But that is the structure of where the law is now. So, what do we do? Well, there are some things you can do ahead of time. Now, be ahead of time in this context means before the union has gone public, before the union has made a demand that you recognize them, or before they have identified for you, Sam, Mary, and John are the members of our bargaining committee, so you dare not take any action against them. Before they've gone public, there are some things you can do. One of the first things I recommend that any employer who thinks they are a target of a union organizing campaign should do is review your handbook or employee policy manual, whatever it is that you have at your workplace that sets forth what your expectations are about employee behavior and establishes what your policies are. Why is that? Because under some decisions that were made, again, under the Obama and Biden boards, any employment policy that interferes with protected concerted activity or can give employees the impression that you are trying to interfere with protected concerted activity will be held to be a violation of the National Labor Relations Act. They will issue a complaint against you. They will demand that you change the policy and, moreover, post a notice in your workforce about how you violated federal law, even for a policy that you've never, ever enforced in fact. And this is something, again, that you want to talk to a labor lawyer about rather than an employment lawyer, because there's all kinds of employer policies that make perfectly good sense, but are unlawful. The classic example, this is not a Biden board or Obama board or Trump board or Bush board issue. This has been black letter law under the NLRA for years. Confidentiality policies. If you've got a policy that broadly just insists that your employees observe the confidentiality of what they do in your workplace, bad on you. Why is that? Well, remember what I said at the beginning. What the NLRA protects is protected concerted activity. And how are employees supposed to engage in concerted activity if they can't talk to one another about what's going on in their workforce? So confidentiality policies have to be reviewed very carefully. It is one thing for you to protect the confidentiality, for example, of the names and addresses and whatnot of the children who are enrolled in your centers. It is another thing for you to try saying, well, you can't talk about your terms and conditions of employment. So have your handbook reviewed by somebody who knows what's going on in this area. The other thing, when you review those policies, is there are a number of policies that I'll tell you, by golly, you should adopt now, before the union's knocking on your door. Why? Well, because if you do it once the union is organizing and you know about it, the board will construe that you're changing the terms and conditions of employment because of union activity, and that's unlawful, says the board. But if you have good policies in place, they can be very, very useful during a union organizing campaign. Anti-solicitation policies, if properly phrased, and I don't know if you could tell it from my voice, that phrase was like double underlined. If properly phrased, an anti-solicitation policy is not just lawful, but in fact, probably your most useful single policy that you could have, because you're entitled, if you do it lawfully, to preclude your employees from soliciting one another in the workplace. Now, you can only do that during work time, but by golly, that's where your employees see one another the most. It's where the union organizers are the most active, is at the workplace. So an anti-solicitation policy is gold. Similarly, you're entitled, if properly phrased, to preclude people from distributing literature or other kind of paraphernalia in your workplace, or coming to the workplace when they're not at work. So there are some really important policies that you can have, but you got to have them before the union's active. Similarly, while you have the chance, this is a good time to review what your employees are operating under. Look at your terms and conditions of employment. And I know this is painful to say, but you need to try to evaluate, are your pay and benefits market competitive? If they're not, well, that's probably one of the reasons why the disgruntled employees are talking to a union. Because, of course, the unions make promises. Whether they can deliver on those promises is something we can talk about. But they make promises about how they're going to get everybody raises. And if you look at the situation and conclude, you know, by golly, we've fallen behind. We haven't raised anybody's pay in 5 years. Our benefits, in comparison of what you could get from the exchange, or our benefits are not good. You can do something about that now, before the union is showing up at your workplace. You probably can't do it once the union has started publicly organizing your employees, because again, once the union is organizing, you can't change the terms and conditions of employment for your personnel. So if the union is public, what are some do's and don'ts? You have to talk to your employees. To the degree that you've reviewed your wages and benefits and you're confident that they're market competitive, you have to tell people that. You're entitled to tell your employees how you feel about a union and why you don't think a union is necessary here, and why, and you're entitled to tell them that. You're entitled to tell them that collective bargaining, that's the process where the union comes to the table and purports to represent all of your employees. You're entitled to tell them that there are risks as well as potential rewards to collective bargaining. Make sure you tell them about your experiences, and more than anything else, listen, because your employees are entitled to talk to you just as you're entitled to talk to them. Here's the four. There's different ways of framing some of these acronyms. I like four. You are 100% entitled to express your opinion and facts. If you believe that your wages are in fact market competitive for the work they're doing, tell them that. You're entitled to do that. It's a fact. You're entitled to tell them your opinion. You're entitled to tell them what are some of the results of union organizing. Now, this is another area where you got to get experienced labor counsel. Under President Biden's appointees to the NLRB, they took some fairly hard lines on some of these issues. So this is another area where specific words make a difference. And you're entitled to tell them about examples. If you have experience working in a unionized environment and you know that it has some real uncomfortable results, right? Once we got a collective bargaining agreement, I couldn't be nearly as flexible with my workers as I was beforehand. That's a real fact. It's a real result, and it's real impactful. So there are don'ts. You can't threaten. Anybody who tells the employees, well, if you unionize, I'm just going to close up the shop. that's a problem. They will run, not walk to the NLRB with something like that. You can't treat them differently because you think they're one of the union organizers. Similarly, this is why I was saying, if your wages are behind the times, you need to change it before the union comes knocking at the door. Because once the union is starting a campaign, you can't change any of the benefits until the campaign is over. Spying is unlawful. And again, remember what I said about confidentiality. You can't prevent people from talking about the union, at least on their own time. Here's the acronym again about what you can't do: threaten, interrogate, promise, or spy. Surveillance. Tips. Some labor lawyers like to switch the order around there, so it's spit, but I think that's less respectful. So no tips. Some examples. I have a series of questions here. How would you answer all of those? The answer to every one of these questions on your screen, the answer to every one of those questions is yes. You can say all of these things. You can do all of these things in the course of a campaign. I'm not going to go through all of them in interest of time. But when I told you the rules are picky, any of these things, the answer is no. It is not okay. The first one sometimes gives people pause. Why is it unlawful for me to start going to my, once the union's shown up, why is it unlawful for me to talk to my employees and say, why are you doing this? What's the problem? Well, for one thing, that is what's referred to as interrogation. You are questioning your employees about their preferences for the union. And take it a step further. If you try to, here's the formal kind of NLRB speak for this, solicit grievances. If you try to find out what's bothering the employees, the board will tell you, well, there's an implicit promise there. Your implicit promise is, if you tell me what's wrong in the workforce, I'll fix it. And that's promising a benefit. So again, this is not new law, but it's been around for a long time. Asking your employees, what's the problem? What's bothering you? Why did you go out and talk to SEIU? Plainly unlawful. But remember what I said before. Listen. You're sure allowed to listen. If your employee comes to you and starts talking about the union and what it is they're telling everybody they're going to get for them, there's a reason why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should listen twice as much as you talk. And that's a good example of it. So all of these things. Oh, the last one, that's also a good, people ask me, why is that unlawful? In that you're not allowed to tell your employees that, by golly, if the union comes in, they'll make all these demands, and the only way they can make a demand stick is by going on strike. So if you elect a union, it's the next best thing to go on strike. That's a problem. You can't predict a strike. Again, this is one of those instances where the words you use make a difference in what the outcome is. If you tell the employees that electing a union means there will be a strike, you are predicting that you're not going to bargain with them in good faith, right? Because if you bargain with them in good faith, you might be able to get a contract without having to go through a strike. So you can't just say there will be a strike. It's more nuanced than that. So what do you do when you're communicating with your employees? Listen more, talk less. Remember what I said there? You can put policies in place that prohibit solicitation on work time. Keep work time focused on work. There's a famous case from the NLRB back in the 40s where they were dealing with some of the early solicitation policies. And there's a line from the case that says, work time is for work. And I always remember that because there's a hotel in Chicago where I was walking in that has had some union problems over the years. That line is etched into a brass plaque that's at the front entrance to the hotel. Work time is for work. I love seeing labor law in action. Um, you can't make promises to your employees, but if you know there are issues, try and find out what you can do about those issues, again, in a lawful way. And this one is kind of, it sounds like a truism, but it really is important. Stay positive. If you start getting negative and just dwelling on all the bad things with SEIU, it's going to rebound to your detriment almost every time. So there are a number of talking points. You'd want to work through all of these with your labor lawyer. The very first one is important. One of the weird things about NLRB elections is the election is decided by whoever votes. Assume, just for the sake of a discussion, you've got 30 employees at your center, and they form an internal union organizing campaign, and they get, I'm going to pick some numbers here on kind of on purpose. They get, out of the 30 employees, they get a dozen to sign up. Let's say 15, just that's almost a majority, right? That's a majority. But say a dozen of 15 employees to sign up. That's enough to get an election from the NLRB, because the NLRB needs a demand to bargain be accompanied by a showing of support from a 30%, 30%. But even though they've gotten a dozen people who signed up and you've got 30 employees, if only 3 people actually take the trouble to come vote, and 2 of them vote for the union, so 2 out of 30, guess what? You're unionized. It is the number of people who vote. So by golly, one of the big messages from an employer every time is, regardless of what your point of view is, be sure you go vote. Tell them, right? It's my opinion that we don't need a union here. In my experience, a union makes it harder to work at a workplace rather than easier. You need to develop specific talking points. Again, these are things that you'd want to talk about with your labor lawyer if you're being actively unionized. You want to develop specific talking points and help your supervisors stick to them. Now, I have just run through all of this in about 30 minutes. This is obviously very high level. I should have started off here. I apologize. My partner, Adam, was going to join us, but he had a family medical emergency today. He is off taking care of his mother. Even though he's much younger than I am, but he had to take care of that, so he could not be here with us today. But that's in a nutshell the kinds of things that you need to be on the lookout for and the kinds of things you can do. If a union sends you a letter saying that they represent your employees, you don't have to take it at face value, but you have to be careful. So I don't know. I know that you have at least one other item on your agenda. I am happy to take any questions if anyone wants to ask them now. So, floor is yours.
Tim, I had a question about you had talked about once union activity is happening, you shouldn't ask your employees like what are the problems or try to make changes was my understanding.
Yes.
I'm wondering, like, I imagine that some places or many places, like my school, we have a regularly scheduled, like, every year we do a couple surveys of the employees and we regularly, it's a regular standard practice that we survey them and we use that to sort of like set goals. Would a center like that was doing that already previously, would they need to stop that?
Yeah, that is a great question. um, Conducting employee surveys, uh, particularly in the middle of a union campaign, is very, very problematic. Now, you have to, at the same time, you've got to continue what are your existing terms and conditions of employment, right? And you're going to say, well, it's part of our regular process is that we survey our folks and find out what's on their mind. If you have that, you need to be paying particular attention to what are the topics on your survey at that instance. Something, even if it's something that you do all the time, if it's something that the NLRB would look at and would say, well, you are trying to uncover support for the union, that is problematic. And I think discretion is probably the better part of valor in that situation. You might want to rethink how you're phrasing some of those questions in that kind of a context. But great question. Great question. And the answer gets, John, one of the, John or Johnny? Johnny, that's one of those issues that you want to talk to somebody specifically about your situation and your facts, because, you know, almost everything that we do in labor law is very fact specific. So it is definitely going to depend on the specific facts and issue, the specific questions on your survey, what it's used for, that kind of thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
Tim, we're a small business, so we've only got 4 classrooms, and I'm wondering if there is a resource that you could recommend for writing anti-solicitation policies, anti-distribution policies, restricting access to school after work, so that the wording is correct, or would you have to go to a labor law to get those?
You know, there are some good examples out there. I know some of the multi-employer associations have some good examples. And there are some good examples, you know, frankly, believe it or not, one of the organizations that has all kinds of helpful information, the National Right to Work Legal Defense Fund, you know, they're pretty good at some of this kind of stuff. So there are some sources out there. You'd have to do some digging around. You know, it's one of the things that my partners and I do, but there are some other resources.
So is National Legal Response?
No, National Right to Work Legal Defense Fund.
This is Susan. I serve on the board of Archbright, so I wanted to be fully transparent on that. But KidsCo as an organization has been a member of Archbright for over 30 years. It is an employment, HR, employment law, service organization that you can become a member of, and then you can get access to all kinds of HR policies. They have their own law firm that does the kind of work that Tim does. And it's a bigger resource than just when you need legal support. It's there to help you with all kinds of HR needs. So I'll put the link to the website for Archbright in the chat. But I mean, it has been a lifesaver for KidsCo for over 30 years. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. Sorry, Tim, but I wanted
No.
Archbright is a great organization, and
Yeah, I've worked with folks at Archbright over the years, so I know exactly what you're referring to. No, good organization.
I had a question about when when a school would call you. At what point should we call you? Like, should we be
Yeah.
calling you when we hear the rumbling? When we like we're
You know, this is one of those times when I think the single best advice I can give you is sooner is better than later. Why is that? Well, because you've got more freedom of action if you start taking action before the union has come and said, you know, we represent we've got cards. That'll be the phrase they use. Tell you why. But they're going to tell you that we've got cards from 60% of your employees and you should recognize us right now. Once that happens, you got a problem. Now, when do I say cards? the NLRA was passed in the 1930s. And one of the things the unions did back in the 1930s is they had little, 3x5 cards. And on the 3x5 card, it said, I, fill in your name, desire for union such and such to represent me for purposes of collective bargaining, and I authorize them to bargain on my behalf. John Doe. Those authorization cards are tricky little things. If you say that happens, someone knocks on your door, I'm from SEIU, I've got cards here from 60% of your people, here they are. If you look at those cards and you, in fact, verify that, oh, yeah, there's Joe Bob, there's Mary Sue, you go through and sure enough, they've got cards signed by 60% of your workforce. Guess what? You no longer have a good faith doubt about their majority status, and we've got trouble. So that's why the sooner the better, because we can help give you some guidance as to what to do. Some of the things that I talked about that are useful to do before the union goes public really can only be done before the union goes public. Because once the union goes public, like I say, if you start changing the terms and conditions of employment of your employees when the union's conducting an election campaign, that's supposed to be what the NLRB refers to as the quiet period. And if you change your T's and C's of employment during a campaign, the board will say that you're violating the act. And even if you win the election, they'll set it aside and make you go through the process again. So there are things that you can do with your labor lawyer. Maybe you've heard rumors, but you don't have anything concrete. You don't have anything public. So sooner is better than later. If, I don't know if you could hear that. That was me knocking on wood. If you do get the union person coming and saying, we represent a majority and we want you to represent us. Now, remember what I said, if you look at those cards, you're in trouble. If they shove the cards in front of you, don't touch them. If they try to give them to you, let the cards fall on the floor. And then you're going to sweep them up with the trash at the end of the day. You don't look at them. But if they do, if they come and say, we demand to bargain, then you really do need to talk to someone who knows what they're doing. Because like I said, in the current legal environment, you've got 2 weeks to get together everything that you need in order to go to the board and demand a secret ballot election. And I always encourage employers, to try to get a secret ballot election. Why? I mean, remember, there's a union organizing campaign committee that is working in your workforce. And how do I say this nicely? One of the things that the union organizers tell them is that there's no point in subtlety. Okay. There's a lot of very heavy-handed conversations going on between the union organizers and their coworkers. But boy, once you get in front of a ballot where you don't have someone looking over your shoulder and you get to mark the X in whatever box you want, people tend to make their own choices. And you've got, you may not have months, but you do have weeks, and you have the time to put together some carefully orchestrated talking points and communications that you'll give to your employees about why you don't think a union is good here. So yeah, sooner is better than later, but certainly by the time they make a demand.
Can you talk to your employees before, like right now, I'm going to this training. I have no idea that any of my employees have been talked to by a union. As far as I know, nothing is going on. Can you talk to your employees as a group about unionizing
Yes.
before that?
Yes.
And
absolutely, yes.
and you can share experiences and have them share their own experiences and thoughts.
The first of that was just fine, Katrina, when you
Mhm.
kept going, and that was when you crossed the line.
Okay.
Even though you don't think that they are organizing, I'd be very careful about a group meeting where you started asking people, so what have you heard about the union? Why would you be thinking about a union? Remember, the rules about interrogation deal with protected concerted activity, and the protection of concerted activity has nothing to do with the union. It is the employees themselves who have that right. So you want to avoid the interrogation, but you are sure entitled to get your employees together and tell them, I heard that the union, part of it actually at a certain level, God bless 925, the SEIU local, but they've given you an option, right? These days, most people are a little disconcerted when the door-to-door salesman comes by, right? It's out of the ordinary. It's not something we're used to. What are you doing? Why are you on my front lawn? Why are you knocking on my door? Give your employees a heads up. We have heard that some labor union got everybody's name and address from the state. And you might have someone knocking on your door telling you that they're from the union and they're here to help you. Well, let me tell you why that's not true. Here's all the good things we have here. Here's all the bad things that happen when I have had other, friends deal with unions. You can kind of launch into a discussion of it without engaging in interrogation, right? You're not going to ask them, so has the union knocked on your front door yet? But
So
you can
really
talk
don't
about the
ask
good things.
questions, but just share. Don't ask questions. Share your
Exactly.
own information. If they share, that's up to them. You're not asking for it. Okay.
Exactly right. Listen, don't ask. You're entitled to hear whatever it is your employees want to say to you about those things. And like I say, the union has given us kind of an excuse to have this conversation, right? Because we know that the union got this contact info. Part of it is you want your employees to know that you're not giving the union this kind of information, right? I mean, lots of employees kind of sit back and take a little bit of umbrage that someone has been given their contact info and where did you get that, and who's giving you my private home address, and a lot of employees are kind of offended by that. You want them to know that it's not your doing. The state did it because they have the obligation to do it under state law. So God bless the union. Every once in a while they give us an excuse to take some action.
Tim, I might just chime in here and build on that as far as WCCA and how we came to have this meeting today and bring this together for our members. So we are aware that SEIU did a request to DCYF for public records. We are still following up on exactly what was released in that public records request to SEIU. And we've yet to get a formal response and know the details of those things. So we're still waiting to confirm that employee's personal information was shared. So I just want to be clear about that. We don't 100% know, but there's this, they did have a request, and then now we are getting reports within our own centers and from other providers that their employees are being contacted at home. So we've had the experience that an employee is at home at their private address, they get a knock on the door and it's SEIU 925. And when the employee asked, where did you get my information? They said that it was from DCYF. So we are still following up and trying to figure out the details of those, but those concerns are what brought us to engage with Tim. And so through a connection with Amy, our lobbyist, we were able to meet Tim and start having this conversation and recognize that we wanted to make sure centers were set up to be proactive about this. And as I've seen in the chat, there's concerns that the entire state is being unionized and whatnot. Our employees can unionize and do those things. And we also know that there was legislation last year from SEIU 925 to create a workforce group. And so, all of those concerns are what are kind of bringing us today and make sure that we were getting the correct information out to members. And so, yeah, just wanted to provide that context and let folks know that we're still waiting on official responses with that information. And we'll definitely be sharing that out with membership once we know. And we're hoping to meet with the public records folks at DCYF next week.
Great. Good work, Colleen. Anybody else? If not, I'll stop sharing my screen and turn things back over to Colleen.
Well, it's a very complicated subject. And thank you, Tim, for, I mean, honestly, I think that as much as it might sound like, soliciting clients, the truth of the matter is this is so complex that really engaging with counsel is probably the most important first step. I mean,
Agreed.
I personally have read, I've even done trainings on the because I just did it because this was years ago thinking, oh, this is interesting. And then I learned so much and I was like, how is anybody supposed to remember this? And then it changes with every administration too. So
No,
who knows what's going to happen.
Susan, that's a
go
great point.
around.
I hope no one construed some of my comments about the Obama board or the Trump board as being overly political. It is a reality that the NLRB, it's a 5-person board that decides everything. And the way it's structured is that 3 of the 5 members are supposed to be members and representative of the president's party, and 2 of them are of the other party. So that kind of changes as the White House changes. And when the majority changes, they kind of, all things being equal, Republicans are a little more pro-business and Democrats are a little more pro-union. So as the White House changes, the board's direction changes. Like I said, I hope no one thought I was being overly political. I didn't mean to be.
No, Tim, I didn't think that was overly political, at least myself. And, we really appreciate you coming and providing, this concrete information and making sure that members are set up for success and
My
know
pleasure.
kind of first steps and things that they can do with that. So we appreciate your
pleasure.
time.
Well, it was a pleasure to be with you, and I'll go ahead and take my leave and wish you all the best.
Yes, thank you, Tim.
Thank you for your time.
Yes.
So Susie, you wrote in there about the legislation. So in that legislation that did not pass, there was a lot of language in there that comes straight out of the National Labor Relations Act. And one of the things in there was about sharing all childcare worker employee information. So if they didn't necessarily get it legally this go around, assuming there are maybe some protections in place, if that passes, then they can without a doubt get that information. Which from an employer standpoint, it's just really disconcerting because I believe I've made a commitment to keep my employees' information confidential. For all those other reasons. So anyway, we're going to be paying close attention to this the Child Care Workforce Labor Standards Board that they want to create. It's a quiet group today.
Yeah, this is
James, I
James.
just saw you.
Yeah, hi. This is James. I had a flyer that was going around my place, and I'm like, where'd this flyer come from? And it was told that asked if it's okay for this to be here, because I just, I said, well, I haven't seen this. I don't approve it. And it looked like it was copied on my copy machine, whatever it was. But to my understanding, one of the employees had been contacted and was passing around this literature in my place of business. And I told them that's a no. And so disposed of that, but didn't poke the bear or anything like that. I have been approached legislative session by SEIU to come and testify with regards to what you all were talking about that didn't pass. It didn't feel right in my spirit. And I told them after reading the information, it was something that didn't align because I was happy with the ground that we had covered as WCCA. And that, I feel like a lot of our issues have been addressed and we're doing things, working together as directors and as all owners and things of that nature to make things better, for this industry. So, but I don't know. I'm trying to just gauge, the temperature as far as what's going on, and it's right now it's just been these leaflets that have gone around. But so definitely, I know at least one of my employees has been contacted, and obviously that person must have been encouraged to get this information out to other people that work there. So
James, was the flyer about the Workforce Standards Board legislation or about unionizing on an individual level? Do you know?
I believe it was about unionizing. I don't think it had to do with the labor relation. I think it was more on a, becoming a union. I didn't keep a copy of it honestly, but but I believe it. That was what was my understanding. I can be nosy and find out, but which I might do. But
I was just
um,
curious. I know that, like we talked about earlier, there will be, another campaign for the legislation for the Workforce Standards Board,
mhm.
which I think is not the same thing as individualized unionizing of individual schools, right? It's a whole other. So I was just curious, but it could have been.
Well, they initially had came inside my place of business about that. So this I kind of felt backdoored, you know. That kind of hit me a little different. Then, I'm a little bit more respectful for you when you come, directly at me. But when you come back door like that, that's a little different. So I felt like um this was a little different.
But
Just
it
my opinion.
sounds like that's kind of their tactic um is to come through the employees in their private residence so that they can organize them ahead of time so that we don't have time to prepare and not coming directly to us about, have you thought of a union or anything like that?
Yeah, that's possible. It's possible. I mean, I've made efforts to make sure that um pretty much in the private what's in the private sector, like that, I'm very competitive with regards to what we do and all our offerings and making sure that uh things are fair and that they have good salaries and different things like that. And so I don't have any qualms about that. It's just a matter of for me, finding out what the agenda is. What's the agenda or what they're telling people, but I don't know that right now. That's something that I'm not privy to.
And that's the scary part, right? Is that I think we're all in this business to do the best for the children and do best for the teachers. And that's the part about the union is that, there are times and places for unions, but there's also times and places where unions make it worse. And being small and private, it can put a lot of restrictions on us that you don't have to threaten that you're going to close, but that could be the result, not being able to maintain if some of the restrictions and requirements are too much.
I
Mhm.
So full disclosure, Small Faces is already unionized by SEIU 925. So we have been since the 90s. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody who wants to know what it's like to be a unionized center and like what happens. But my experience is the opposite. Like nobody wants the school to close. Nobody wants the school to be in financial trouble. Like teachers don't want to like bankrupt the place they work at, right? So everybody really, if it's done right, unionization just allows for a conversation to happen and problem solving to happen together. That's my opinion. And if people want to talk about it offline, I'm happy to do that. The other thing though, I think it's probably important for us to understand. I don't think the union is probably out there trying to unionize a bunch of little centers right now. Like I think their focus is wanting to talk about the Workforce Standards Board legislation. And I think they're trying to organize workers in general, childcare workers, to support this legislation. And I think that it would be interesting then for us to understand like what our role as directors might be with that legislation or so that like that's one of the things I think I'd love to find out because I don't get the sense that the union's push right now is unionization of centers on a one at a time basis.
Yeah, 'cause-
Johnny, I will just share with you in response to that. So I did, when we met with the union about that legislation, I asked the question, I said, well, if you're willing to take out all of the requirements to give our employee information to you and just focus on the standards of childcare, then we have something to talk about. Would you be willing to take that out? Because all of the language in the legislation referencing the National Labor Relations Act, and that was like a non-starter. They wouldn't even have a conversation about that. And then this is not the first time that the unions have attempted to use legislation. They've done it, we're successful with the family child care centers. But this was, I want to say maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was other legislation that came forward. And at that time, the Boys and Girls Club and the Y were successful in getting an amendment included in that legislation that said if you had 10 or more centers, you were exempt from having to join the union. So that meant only the very largest of organizations would be exempt from it. And the legislation obviously didn't pass. So I don't think they're trying to unionize individual centers one at a time. I think they want to try to get legislation to get the right to bargain for the entire state without even us being able to vote those unions in. That's the concern that I have, having read that legislation pretty thoroughly and bringing it forward to Kellis Borick, who's, a labor attorney who does contract negotiation. So that's my caution and my concern is that I feel like it's a one fell swoop kind of thing, not an individual center at a time situation. It's similar to the family home. So that's the only thing I would add to that is that's what has raised my concern because it takes away even our rights as employees to even vote. And I feel like that doesn't feel very democratic.
Yeah, and I was a part of that, Susie, back then, and honestly was going hard myself for SEIU unionization for centers, and then it failed, and then WCCA came and kind of took up the this and we made some changes and some headway. And right now I'm just in a different space. I think early learning has become more priority in our state. And I don't know about as far as barriers. Johnny, what made you all unionize as an individual center?
Well, this was back before I was part of the school. I started as a teacher at the school, so I was actually in the union and was the union steward for the faculty before I became the director and moved to the other side of the table to bargain from the other side of the table. But my understanding, and some people probably have a better sense of this, was there was a push in Seattle at some point, I think in the 90s, to try to unionize centers, both individually and together as a big group, with a goal towards pushing worthy wages legislation through the legislature. And so at some point, I think there were about 12 centers. When I was a teacher, there were 12 centers unionized as a large group, that they bargained contracts for their schools with their own employees, but then they also created a lobbying block that went to Olympia and pushed for legislation and worthy wage. So it was trying to be sort of both. They were trying to do both, and I think. And so, as far as I know, Small Faces is the only one of the original centers that's still unionized. We're sticking around. It's worked
It
for
might be
us.
it might only be one of the ones that's still here, like General Dragon was one of them that I recall, and they closed, gosh, a long time ago. And you're right, Donnie, it's all related to the worthy wages work. I used to be involved in that myself, and I met with union representatives frequently and at that time. And my only question every time was, well, you say you're gonna help us raise wages, but if revenue only comes from parents, how would we do that? And then they would say things like, well, we can help get training, and maybe we can help with benefits. I said, that's not where my biggest expense is. 80% of my operating budget is staff. If you can't help me get higher wages, and it would have to come from the government, why would I ask my staff to give up some of their wages for you to do that? And that's what, one of my questions for you, Johnny, is besides negotiating a contract, do your employees get anything else for what they pay for?
Well, one of the things that I think that the employees get for having the union is that we do meet every 3 years and sit down and actually bargain a contract. So it's like kind of makes sure that there's a process in place for administration to listen to what employees value, but also for the teachers to listen to, like, the realities of what we all deal with, right? Like, I actually sit down with the budget and I'm like, look, here's the budget. Here's how much money we have. Here's what other people charge near us. Like, I can't double the tuition rates to cover, all of these things. But
Yeah.
like, let's talk about what's important. Like the last time we bargained, one of the big things that came up is we have lots of staff now who don't live in Seattle, right? They're commuting from outside of the city, which is kind of new. And so transportation became like a really big issue. And so I was like, well, let me look into what like business level Orca cards for employees are. Like, is that cost effective, right? So I went out and I was like, you know what? We could do this in the budget. We could afford Orca cards as a benefit,
Mhm.
At the same time, like, any money we spend over here, that doesn't go directly into raises, right? So like, let's talk about, is that, is transportation the most important thing? Are raises the most important thing? Kind of going back and forth. And then the nice thing is that once we kind of laid out the contract, then everybody goes back and votes. My board has to vote on it, right? If they don't like it, I have to go back. The teachers vote
Mm.
on it. If they don't like it, we have to go back. So everybody kind of goes back and sells the contract. And then it really feels like, okay, we actually came to an agreement, right? If somebody wishes we had done something differently, it's like, no, we actually, like, everybody had a chance to talk about it and vote and give their voice. Like, we can't get everything everybody wants. So it feels like to me, I have something to lean on when
Yeah.
talking to individual employees about, like, this is the agreement we came up with. These are the benefits we agreed to. Like, they're competitive. They're as good as we can do. So
Yeah, I think that's a testament to your leadership, Johnny. Really, I mean, I think that's wonderful. I mean, I honestly do. Because I think there's a lot of people out there that, depending on the organization, the board, um, it would be harder for them to achieve what you have. Because I think you do a great job, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you're willing to share too. I have so many questions about this and no one to talk to about it. So I really appreciate you being the one center that is unionized and is willing to talk about what that feels like. I get confused, and this is a follow-up on Susan's question or statement about why the union is needed for that conversation to happen. So my schools are K-12s, and they have these conversations with their employees every year about the kinds of things that you would make their work, make them want to stay working at the school. And if it's a transportation issue or it's a lot of it is flexibility of schedules. A comp days kinds of like, can we get a comp day policy that is flexible enough that doesn't leave the administration like high and dry, but also allows for doctor's appointments or whatever it is that makes it difficult to stay in, maybe it's a later hour for somebody who has to drop a child off or what have you. And those are the kinds of conversations that good employees have with their employers have with their employees. So I'm confused about why, if the union isn't able to really change the dynamic of how much teachers are being paid, because that's dependent on how much you can charge, why do they need a role in that conversation?
And I think that's a great question. Like, and I think one of the things Tim was saying in his presentation is that like often why teachers are organizing is if they have complaints. And so part of like the best thing that you can do is have really good leadership practices in place to make sure that you are asking these questions and you are, like you could do all of the things I just said without, having a union. You could have every 3 years we sit down with the staff and we have these conversations and we discuss benefits. Like I think all that stuff is just good practice, right? And then probably there's not going to be interest in like unionizing because we've already got a good thing going, right? And we've already got that happening.
And
My only other
Johnny-
benefit I
Yeah.
get from the union is like, so we're a nonprofit, so I have a board of directors, right? So it rolls over all the time. And I don't know for those of you with boards, but the boards that I've had over the years, people want to get under the hood and start messing with stuff, right? They want to start changing benefits or changing people's pay or rearranging what people's job titles are. So the nice thing for me is like I have a bargain contract. So when the board brings that up, I just say, hey, we can't touch any of that. We have a legal contract. We have a process. If the board wants to bring it up, in 2 years' time, but it actually saves me a lot of headaches.
That's hilarious. I can totally see that.
Yeah.
I think that that's my resistance to the workforce board conversation, especially when I don't mind the conversation, but I do really mind that it's tied to a union expectation, because it's not about them, the teachers voting on what they want. It's not about the unionization of the teachers in a building. It's at a grand scale that the state is sanctioning this process for making determinations about salary or schedules or firing practices or what have you, that we already follow so many rules on that. I mean, the L&I, and there are a lot of labor rules how you're supposed to treat and get rid of, if you have to, a teacher that is not doing well. And there is a question in the chat about that. And I mean, that's a really good question. That's a huge problem at K-12. So I'm curious what you found to be true about trying to let people go that are not doing a good job.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely a challenge with like having a union contract, right? Like every union contract is going to have some really specific things in it about how corrective action works for teachers and like very described steps about like you have to like write somebody up and then you have to follow up with certain things and do an investigation. And if it's written badly, it can really tie your hands. Like the whole K-12 thing where they end up having people in like classrooms sitting there getting paid for no work, like that kind of thing. I definitely, like as a new director at first, got into trouble for me not understanding my contract like 100% well, and it ending up like having a difficult time getting rid of a person who was not doing well. One of the things that finally though really worked for me is like, in renegotiating the contract, like teachers don't want bad teachers working alongside them. It's in nobody's interest to keep people at the center who aren't doing a good job. So getting everybody at the table and talking it through and being like, okay, we really, you know, we need to have a process that's going to work for all of us. Like, I got good at maneuvering through the process and making sure that I'm following up with people in writing, and I have to cross T's and dot I's that I wouldn't have to do if I didn't have the contract. I'll be honest, like it is sometimes a headache, and there are sometimes when I'm not able to move as quickly as I should have moved, and somebody's hanging around longer than they should. But so I don't want to sugarcoat it. Like that's definitely like a union issue. Oh, interesting. This is the flyer.
Yeah, James, I think it might be time to contact a lawyer.
I mean, the last statement did state that they're trying to do something statewide, together through legislation.
We've seen the agendas for the national and the local union groups, and that is their agenda is to unionize every private school and early learning program. That is that's what they're building a process for. So I think the Workforce Standards Board, in my opinion, the Workforce Standards Board was a nod to that effort.
Yeah, I think it is, but I mean, I think Johnny paints the point about it's possible to do it in a good way. But I think it depends on the players at the table. And Johnny, I think, is a key player at that table.
I think it would be interesting to think about, like, I think we've all talked about wanting to have, that direct influence at the state level for directors, right? Like it sounded like part of what you were saying, Susan, was like the Workforce Standards Board really cut that say out, right? That like cut that voice out. And I almost wonder if we had like an alternative proposal or a different way to think about, what would it look like if there were I don't know what it would be, an advisory board or somewhere where we could point out things like, hey, here's overregulation from DCYF that we would like to see addressed. Here's funding that needs to come into the system to actually allow people to pay good wages. Or, here's universal healthcare coverage for childcare workers that would take a huge, thing off of our plate if we could get that.
Yeah, Johnny, just to build on that, I agree. Like there's pieces of this that obviously spark interest to be able to like negotiate and get some things and also make sure that center rates are being increased year after year. We're always the ones, and we saw it very clearly this last year, getting punted. Really easy to get punted again. I think that we're gonna have to, have our full force out there to protect those. But I also think that there are some other mechanisms in place that we could in turn offer. And one that I just wanted to bring to this conversation is the structure of ELAC and having the provider support subcommittee. And I currently sit on the executive committee of ELAC, and we are going to be working on a charter specifically for provider supports, which has never existed before. And there is a lot of talk about creating, more, instead of it being such a town hall and formal space and just kind of receiving presentations and whatnot, it rather being a working group that is doing some of these things. And we've seen a lot of really great work with the design team that Child Care Aware has been hosting. One of our board members, Angie, has participated in that for quite some time. And so I think there are these things kind of coming through, and I think there may be some other mechanisms that are already kind of exist and can be built on and built out to achieve what it is that we're looking for, and really having that more formal say. And as WCCA has talked about a lot, just kind of that seat at the table, not having decisions being made in back offices where those who are actually doing the hands-on day-to-day work are not involved. We know that we're never going to create a great system if we don't include the people who are actually doing the work there. And so I do think that those are some pieces that WCCA can continue to work on, and as an association, be representative of the centers and be that other voice. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's some pieces to that too, that, it's not just a turn your nose up to the entire idea, but it's the complexity that comes in place, and maybe what is the long-term motive that has been, at least that I've been hearing, is the major concern from a lot of providers. And I know
to
folks have
answer
stayed
your
on with us
question-
extra time. You guys are welcome to keep chatting and whatnot, but I recognize people need to hop off. We've been on an extra bit, but I think this has been a great
Oh,
conversation.
I apologize. I was just gonna say, Susie, that's one of the goals of the WCCA, is to be that large statewide organization that gets acknowledgement like SEIU. And we've asked for that, but I think we need to build our membership so that we actually have stronger numbers.
Okay.
Because right now, but I also just found out that even of the family home providers, only about 25% are actually part of the union. That's it.
I think the legislators would like a different answer than the Workforce Standards Board, especially if it wasn't going to cost them any money. I love the idea that Johnny suggested, was which part of the Workforce Standards Board do we like? And how can we utilize the current like WCCA or even ELAC or what have you to do some of this work and answer these questions? I love that. And thank you to the WCCA for the work that you're putting in here, for having Johnny be able to answer a bunch of questions, Susan, Colleen. I mean, that was a really important conversation we just had with that lawyer and that we just had here. And I feel better having a group I can go to or be a part of that is doing such good work. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, we're better together. For sure. We just wanted to make sure that you had some really good, solid information to guide you. And there's those do's and don'ts are really important. And even that thing about like the whole idea of coordinated, or like whatever that thing is that that you can't do, where you can't say don't. That was framed in a different way than I've heard it before, and now it's even deeper in my brain.
Will I sorry if I missed this. Will the slides be available from that, or like if people didn't take notes or whatever?
You have to ask. I didn't
I
even
don't
think to
have
ask.
that. I was gonna say, I don't have that information off the top of my head, but I will follow up and ask Tim what we have to share out. I did record the meeting here today. I didn't have other recorders join the meeting just because I wasn't sure that folks would feel as comfortable sharing, personal stories or asking questions and whatnot. I do have this meeting recorded for WCCA's purposes, and so I can pull notes from that as well. And we can inquire about those things. But yes, WCCA is working with Tim, and so that has benefit to our members too, in that way. So there's information that can be shared and questions asked and all those types of things set up. So we'll follow up and we'll make sure that we get an email out to members just kind of with an overview of today. And if there's resources and things that we could share directly in there. I know Susan had put some links in the chat for Archbright and whatnot. I think those are all great tools for people to start exploring, so we can get those kind of linked in there and follow up.
And we're going to put Tim's name in front of our organization's early learning program so that they have a person to call. I liked him. I thought he'd be helpful. And so anybody that's going to volunteer their time to come here and offer this, I think it's worth connecting our schools to those people. So know that that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Susie.
Yeah, and what I would say is lawyers are very expensive. And so so I'm going to put in a shameless plug for Archbright because they do great work, but it's much more affordable for small businesses. And like I said, KidsCo's been a member for 30 years, long before I became a board member. at Archbright, but their support with, so for instance, Kidsco does have a no solicitation policy that Archbright helped us create. And so, and now I'm now having it reviewed by Archbright just to make sure it's current. But Archbright is full of tools that go beyond this kind of thing, but just HR related to make you a stronger employer. They help you set up policies just like Tim talked about that are not illegal. And also coach you through sort of best practices in leadership and management so that you can prevent yourself from getting into trouble with employees or even some of the, the laws that may exist. So I highly recommend it from the standpoint, it is not just a legal service. It helps you with your HR needs, period.
Well, I think that we're maybe at the conclusion of chatting today. Obviously, a topic that we can continue to explore. As members, please do feel free to reach out to us and let us know if there are certain topics or things that are coming up for you that you really want to make sure that we're following up on and that we have, our eyes and ears on. And yeah, I believe we will have updates coming here in the next month as we continue the conversations we've already started with DCYF and any follow-up from this meeting. But again, please don't hesitate, and please remind your friends to join the WCCA so they can have this support as well.
Colleen, I'm sorry, I have one more question. Is there any effort to change the law on merit that keeps teachers' information private instead of making that public?
So we haven't done anything officially, but we will certainly be setting our legislative agenda with members and getting feedback. I think we're just waiting to get all of the information. So if we do know it is allowable and DCYF did release it, that is an action step that we could take as WCCA. If we find out that it wasn't allowable, what it was shared, those are different action steps that we will take. If we find out it wasn't allowed and it wasn't shared, we're going to have to do some more digging to figure out what it is that SDI is doing to get this information. But yeah, I think there's next steps for the WCCA for sure in all of this, and we will definitely engage with members ahead of setting our legislative agenda. And certainly with the skills of Amy as our lobbyist, being able to work with our legislators, if that's a bill or something that we want to bring forward, we would definitely put the effort into getting something like that in place. So yeah, so more to come.
Thank you.